advisors were exposed, not by scandalous headlines, but by documentation. Evidence, that's what changes history. And for the first time in years, Epstein's sealed client list surfaced in the spotlight. This wasn't about politics, it was about accountability. And in America, when institutions misuse secrecy to protect themselves instead of the people, we all pay a hidden price, often decades later. What happened next wasn't theater. It was consequence. At 2:30 in the afternoon, inside room 254 of the Rayburn Building, the atmosphere wasn't dramatic, it was charged. That kind of room is built for procedure, not confession.
No offense, but if you're thinking about getting a HELOC from your local bank, you're about to make a really expensive mistake.
Built for procedure, not confession. Pam Bondi entered first. Polished, controlled, convinced that her script on national security would shield her from disruption. But power doesn't come from prepared lines. It comes from honesty. Kash Patel followed. His confidence wasn't earned. It was inherited from years behind federal walls. What neither of them understood was that Congressman Jamie Raskin wasn't there to perform. He was there to dismantle. And when someone shows up with facts, not spin, it doesn't matter how rehearsed you are. The clock starts ticking on the truth. They came with teams, legal advisors, intelligence liaisons, White House counsels, all prepared to deflect and delay. I've seen the same setup in boardrooms where liabilities are buried in footnotes. But politics, like business, runs on credibility. And once you lose that, no badge or clearance level can protect you. Congressman Raskin had something more powerful than position. He had unredacted documents, files they thought were permanently sealed. I've always said sunlight is a powerful disinfectant in investing and in public service. And what was about to unfold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was irreversible. Because when proof enters the room, deniability exits fast. Trailing behind Bondi and Patel was what I'd call a tactical formation of insulation. Justice Department attorneys, federal strategists, White House legal minds, their briefcases weren't filled with answers. They carried pre-cleared language, liability buffers, and press-safe scripts to sidestep any form of responsibility. I've seen it on earnings calls when a company knows the numbers won't hold. They show up not to speak truth, but to manage risk. These individuals weren't ready for volatility, but the real danger wasn't political fallout, it was factual exposure. They underestimated one thing. That paper, when backed by truth, outweighs any position of power. What Congressman Raskin had in his folder wasn't speculation. It was the kind of documentation that doesn't blink, doesn't spin, and doesn't wait. The opening moments echoed predictability, measured tones, rehearsed protocol, media murmurs, anticipating another partisan deadlock. The cameras rolled as if on autopilot. But I've lived long enough to know when stakes are systemic, silence breaks quickly. What unfolded wasn't political theater. It was institutional failure laid bare. No market signal was ever this clear. At 2:33 in the afternoon, Chairman James Comer gave the floor to Congressman Jamie Raskin. In any other world, 30 minutes would have been filled with posturing, but not that day. Raskin didn't need half an hour. He needed 52 seconds. And with the calm of a seasoned accountant revealing a cooked balance sheet, he began not with accusation, but gratitude. That tone always precedes something irreversible. The shift was immediate. One question, plain surgical. Attorney General Bondi, Director Patel, why is Jeffrey Epstein's client list still classified 6 years after his death? I've learned that the power of a question lies in its timing and precision. That one pierced through layers of spin like a shareholder letter exposing fraud. Bondi, usually composed, froze mid-expression. Patel, adjusting his tie, looked less like a federal insider and more like a man watching control slip away. What made this moment historic wasn't just the silence, it was what it revealed. Not uncertainty, but guilt's first visible form, hesitation. That's when you know the story is no longer a defense. It's a revelation. And in those seconds, the cost of secrecy became measurable. Patel adjusted his tie again, a move I've seen too often when discomfort meets public pressure. The camera closed in, not for drama, but for documentation. Bondi tried to speak first. Her voice carried that cautious confidence you hear when executives try to explain a missed quarter. She cited ongoing investigations and national security concerns. It's a familiar refrain. When transparency threatens control, the fallback is classification. But Raskin didn't let the narrative drift. With surgical clarity, he cut in. Ongoing, he asked? Jeffrey Epstein has been dead for 6 years. In business, time dilutes value. In justice, delay distorts accountability. Her words didn't just falter, they lost all weight. And in that moment, the shield of ambiguity cracked. The tension in the room shifted from passive observation to active disbelief. Reporters raised their eyes. Committee members leaned forward. I've seen shareholders do the same when a CEO stumbles during an earnings call. Patel stepped in, trying to stabilize the narrative. He referenced ongoing investigations tied to co-conspirators. But in doing so, he admitted the existence of a broader network, still active, still protected. Raskin didn't need to press. He simply leaned forward and drew the line himself.
Here's the #1 place bed bugs hide that exterminators never check. Thousands of bed bugs are
Drew the line himself. If the client list includes people currently under federal review, then withholding it isn't just concealment, it's obstruction. That's not a trap. That's a confession wrapped in process. And once it's said aloud, no amount of legal jargon can walk it back. Bondi's expression hardened, her lips pressed tight. I've seen that look before in boardrooms, in courtrooms. It's the look of someone calculating how much can still be protected. I cannot comment on specifics, she offered. But Raskin wasn't asking for speculation. He had the data. Quietly, deliberately, he opened a manila folder stamped top secret. The golden FBI seal reflected in the camera lens like a mirror held up to a failing institution. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The folder itself was louder than any accusation. In investing, we say, numbers don't lie. In government, documents carry that same weight when they're shown. And once they're visible, silence turns into testimony. Raskin unfolded a document. The seal was familiar to anyone who's ever handled classified oversight. But the words were far more explosive than the paper they were printed on. It was a memorandum dated September 23rd, 2025, sent from Assistant Director Sarah Chen to Director Kash Patel. Patel's expression changed not with panic, but with recognition. He had authorized the very suppression now being revealed. That moment reminded me of when a CEO sees internal emails leaked in a shareholder lawsuit. The content didn't need interpretation. It was a roadmap of intent. Raskin read it word for word. Per request, I completed the evaluation regarding permanent non-disclosure of the Epstein client archive. The phrase wasn't vague. It was deliberate strategy masquerading as classification. The next paragraph was nothing short of institutional collapse in ink. 207 names. That number wasn't just large, it was systemic. 17 sitting federal judges, 43 congressional members, 12 executives from top-tier corporations, and 8 identified foreign intelligence operatives. This wasn't collateral damage, it was infrastructure. A structure built not just on secrets, but on agreements to keep them. And at the center of it, a chilling acknowledgement from Attorney General Bondi herself. She affirmed that public release of the list would, quote, politically neutralize the Republican Party. The memo concluded with one line, indefinite suppression advised under national security exemption. That wasn't security, that was protectionism of power, not people. No one moved. Bondi's eyes scanned the room, not in search of a rebuttal, but of refuge. Patel remained frozen, the calculation gone from his face. I've seen markets respond to revelations like this, swift, stunned, irreversible. The atmosphere didn't need commentary. Everyone in the chamber understood. This wasn't just about individual guilt, it was about institutional betrayal. Raskin kept reading. His voice never rose. That's what made it more devastating. The silence around him wasn't empty. It was confirmation. Power had finally met transparency, and transparency didn't blink. Patel opened his mouth, maybe to deny, maybe to delay, but Raskin didn't wait. He reached for a second document. This wasn't theater, it was escalation. He held it up. A memorandum dated October 15th, stamped with Bondi's initials. The contents weren't ambiguous. It was a directive, not legal advice, not strategic analysis, a command. The memo stated that the president had explicitly prohibited the release of Epstein's client list. It cited political damage, specifically that several individuals named had contributed over $47 million to Republican election efforts. When financial influence crosses into judicial suppression, that's no longer lobbying. That's leverage weaponized against the rule of law. And in finance, we have a name for that undisclosed liability. The memo continued. This cannot be released before midterms. Locate legal framework for indefinite classification. Not recommendation, not request. Instruction. What followed wasn't a reaction. It was recoil. The chamber stiffened. Faces went pale. Cameras zoomed in, not for drama, but to record history as it broke open. Raskin let the number echo $47 million. That kind of money doesn't just influence campaigns, it buys silence. And here, it bought protection from justice. This wasn't a partisan slip-up. It was institutional manipulation. Political donations used as currency to block exposure. Bondi started to speak.
I want to know, have you made this mistake with your holster? And by mistake, I mean, did you get a holster that's uncomfortable so you don't carry all the time? You may have. And even if you hadn't, you probably want a holster that's more comfortable. Enter the Vanish holster, the world's most comfortable holster. And guess what? Today, it's buy one, get one free on these. That's right. We're not going to run this special forever, but if you grab one right now, you'll get one of these already at a discount, and then you'll get the second one 100% free. Why would you want this holster? You know, it's a great question. And the reason is, it's comfortable. Like I said, we have built it with premium materials like this yoga pant material in the belt that is supportive and stretchy so that you can wear it all day long without even noticing it's there. It doesn't get stinky.
Political donations used as currency to block exposure. Bondi started to speak. But whatever defense she had was too late. The memo had already spoken louder. She attempted context. That's out of context, she insisted. But some documents don't need context. They define it. Raskin didn't argue. He cut through with a final blow, a third document. This time, it bore Patel's signature. A direct instruction to the classification board. The order, elevate Epstein's client list to the highest secrecy tier. Label it ultra secret. Designate it for permanent burial. This wasn't procedural overreach. It was institutional lockdown. And when secrecy becomes irreversible by design, democracy begins to rot from the inside. In investing, we're taught to spot structural risk early. This wasn't early. This was exposure long, overdue. And no one in that room could look away. The document laid it out plainly. This classification level would require a sitting president's direct approval to reverse effectively sealing the Epstein records for 50 years. That's not oversight, that's entombment. Half a century of silence. Raskin didn't dramatize it. He simply shut the folder with finality. The noise wasn't in his voice. It was in what the file represented, a weaponization of secrecy. Then he addressed Patel directly, not as a colleague, but as an architect of concealment. Creating a new classification level to shield political allies wasn't about protecting the nation. It was about protecting a party. And when national intelligence is used to enforce political outcomes, what you're watching isn't security policy, it's institutional capture. The response was instant. Journalists clattered on keyboards. Phones lit up across the room. Within minutes, hashtags flooded digital space. Epstein files, Bondi cover-up, Congress compromised. It wasn't a leak, it was a reckoning. But Raskin wasn't finished. He reached for one final document, this time stamped with the seal of the National Security Council. He read from paragraph 4 of Patel's own memo. The justification was no longer abstract. It listed hard numbers: 17 Republican-appointed judges, 43 Republican members of Congress. Those names weren't just redacted. They were the reason the list remained hidden. When disclosure threatens an election, that's not a security breach. That's a political liability dressed in legal armor. The memo didn't hint. It confessed. Releasing the client list would destroy Republican electoral viability and ignite a constitutional crisis. And the order didn't come from a bureaucrat. It came from the top. President Trump had issued the directive for permanent suppression. That sentence didn't just shift the hearing. It shifted the country's understanding of who was protecting what. Bondi sat still, not in defiance, but in collapse. Patel looked on as if watching the foundation of his career erode in real time. This wasn't about damage control anymore. It was about exposure. Quiet, irreversible, broadcast for all to see. Raskin didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. They had taken an oath, not to a party, not to a presidency, to the Constitution. And in that room, we watched what it looks like when that oath is traded for institutional protection. Raskin didn't need theatrics. He simply stated the truth. They had buried justice to preserve political power. They had concealed crimes to protect influence. And when neither Bondi nor Patel responded, the silence said more than any statement. It wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the end of pretense. As they exited, cameras followed, not to cover leadership, but to document collapse. They were no longer officials. They had become case studies in how power erodes accountability. The consequences moved faster than anyone expected. Federal investigations were launched within hours. Prosecutors began reviewing documents already circulating inside intelligence networks. And across the country, the realization settled in. This wasn't a cover-up at the fringes. It had reached the core. For decades, Americans have trusted classification systems to protect national security. Now they saw those systems used to shield political donors and suppress public truth. When key figures act with this level of concealment, you have to assume it's not isolated. In finance, we call that unreported exposure. In governance, it's far worse. It's democratic decay dressed in procedural formality. The truth, when timed right, doesn't just inform, it disarms. This wasn't just another report. It was a rupture. Years of quiet complicity undone in a matter of pages. And yet, what we witnessed wasn't a single scandal. It was a glimpse into how systems protect themselves from scrutiny. In my world, sunlight is the best disinfectant. In theirs, it's the greatest threat. This was that moment, the one where concealment failed and accountability began. What happens next isn't just about them. It's about how a republic responds when the mask comes off. Because sometimes integrity isn't lost all at once. It fades, file by file, until someone opens one.